The morning had started like any other. The kind of slow, golden weekend morning that made the neighborhood feel like a picture from a brochure. The air was calm, the lawns were freshly trimmed, and the sound of sprinklers echoed in rhythm across the cul-de-sac. The kind of suburban quiet that almost felt sacred until my kids decided to ruin it. They were just being kids, really. The driveway and the sidewalk out front had always been their canvas, a place for hopscotch grids, rainbow doodles, suns, and stars. Buckets of chalk scattered across the concrete like spilled candy. Their laughter carried down the street, innocent and loud. It should have been nothing. Harmless. But in this neighborhood, harmless wasn't always enough. By noon, the first disapproving glances began. Curtains twitched, joggers slowed down. A few neighbors gave that tight, lipped smile that said, "I'm judging you, but pretending not to." It wasn't long before the HOA president herself, Patricia Lawson, a woman whose wardrobe was made entirely of beige and authority, appeared. She didn't approach me at first. Instead, she stood near the edge of the sidewalk, staring at the drawings like they were vandalism. The pastel colors, blues, pinks, and yellows, reflected off her sunglasses. She took out her phone, snapped a few photos, and walked away without a word. That was when I knew trouble was coming. A few days later, the letter arrived. It was tucked neatly into my mailbox. OA letterhead, perfectly folded, smelling faintly of printer ink and arrogance. The words were short but sharp. Your property has been found in violation of Article 400 unauthorized alteration of public surfaces. You are hereby fined $200 for defacement of community property. Repeat offenses will result in additional penalties. I reread it twice, disbelief growing into anger. Defacement. It was chalk, rain-soluble, temporary, innocent. But that didn't matter. In the world of the HOA, rules were sacred, and Patricia enforced them with the precision of a machine. That evening, I walked outside to find the kids confused, their drawings still scattered across the pavement. They had drawn a giant sun with smiling faces and the words, "Happy Day," scrawled across the center. And according to Patricia, that was apparently a crime. By the next morning, it rained. The chalk washed away completely, every sun, every rainbow, every scrap of color gone. The sidewalk was blank again, cold gray concrete returning to its sterile glory. But the fine didn't wash away. Patricia's enforcement team left another notice taped to my door, a reminder to pay within 10 days or face additional consequences. There was no reasoning with them. I tried attending the next HOA meeting to explain that it was children's chalk, that it wasn't vandalism, that it had already disappeared. But every sentence was met with bureaucratic smirks and the same robotic response. Rules are rules. That's when something inside me shifted. I had moved into this neighborhood for peace, for quiet mornings and friendly faces. But the HOA had turned it into a stage for control. Every flower that was the wrong shade, every mailbox with a non-approved design, every child's toy left visible from the street. All of it was monitored, recorded, fined. And I realized in that meeting, sitting under those flickering fluorescent lights, that Patricia wasn't interested in community. She wanted obedience. That's when an idea began to form. It started as a spark, the image of something bold and beautiful, something that couldn't be washed away by rain or buried under paperwork. If they wanted to call chalk art defacement, then maybe I'd show them what real art looked like. Over the next few days, I started researching. I looked up city codes, property boundaries, and homeowner rights. I learned that while the HOA controlled many aspects of the community, they had no authority over private fences, garage doors, or home exteriors, as long as the paint was professionally applied. That was the loophole I needed. The following week, while Patricia and her board were busy planning their spring compliance audit, I began my plan. I reached out to a few local artists I'd met at the farmers market, people who loved community art and knew how to turn blank walls into stories. I showed them a photo of my garage wall, the plain beige expanse that faced the street. "Can you make this something special?" I asked. They smiled. "What do you have in mind?" And that's when I told them everything. About the chalk drawings, about the fine, about the HOA, about how they wanted the neighborhood to look identical, controlled, sanitized. I wanted the opposite. We started sketching ideas late into the evenings, swirling designs of color and life, filled with the same joy my kids had once drawn on the sidewalk. A mural not of rebellion, but of freedom. By the time the final design was ready, I knew Patricia would lose her mind. But that was the point. Early one Saturday morning, before anyone was awake, the artists arrived. They brought ladders, buckets of paint, and quiet smiles. The first strokes of color went up just as the sun rose over the rooftops: bold blues, warm oranges, bright yellows. Birds, trees, flowers, a giant sunburst stretching across the entire garage door. It was breathtaking. Neighbors began to wander out one by one, their coffee cups frozen mid-sip. Some were shocked, others smiled. A few even clapped quietly from across the street. By noon, Patricia arrived, clipboard in hand, jaw tight. She didn't even have to say anything. The fury was written all over her face. I watched from the driveway as she circled, taking photos like she had with the chalk, muttering to herself. But this time there was nothing she could do. The mural was on my private property, professionally painted, within all city regulations. When she realized it, I saw something flicker across her face. Frustration mixed with disbelief. The HOA could fine me for chalk, but not for this. As the sun began to set, the mural glowed in the golden light, alive with color and defiance. It wasn't just paint on a wall. It was a statement. A declaration that not every rule deserved obedience. And for the first time since moving into that perfect neighborhood, I felt something new: freedom. But as the last light faded and the crowd dispersed, I caught Patricia's car idling at the corner, headlights glowing like eyes in the dusk. She wasn't done. Not yet. The mural changed everything. For a brief moment, the neighborhood felt alive. People stopped on their evening walks to admire it, kids pointed in wonder, and even the grumpy retirees softened a little when they saw it glowing under the sunset. The dull street of beige houses suddenly had color, energy, and conversation. But not everyone appreciated it. By Monday morning, the HOA office was flooded, not with praise, but with complaints. Patricia had mobilized her forces. She went door to door, clipboard in hand, whispering to every neighbor she could corner. She told them the mural was a disruption to the community aesthetic, and unauthorized modification, and potentially lowers property values. The irony was painful, because that mural had done more to bring people together than Patricia ever had. Still, the OA's machine began to move. Within days, I received a thick envelope, thicker than usual, containing an official notice of violation. It cited multiple articles, paragraphs, and subsections of the OA's bylaws. The language was designed to intimidate: excessive coloration inconsistent with neighborhood standards, potential reflection hazard, aesthetic disharmony. They even included printed photos of my garage, in black and white, as if that could somehow make it look worse. This time the fine wasn't $200, it was $500, and Patricia made sure to hand-deliver the notice herself. She left it taped to my door in a clear plastic folder, sealed like evidence in a courtroom. But what she didn't expect was that I was ready for her. You see, after the chalk incident, I'd started learning how the HOA actually worked. I'd read through every single line of their regulations. I'd attended their meetings, observed their voting procedures, even studied their budget reports. Patricia ran the HOA like her personal empire, but empires crumble when someone learns the rules better than the ruler. The next morning, I drafted my response, professional, polite, but packed with legal precision. I cited the exact sections of the bylaws that protected homeowner expression on private property. I included city zoning references, precedent cases, and an attached certificate from the muralist confirming professional installation. Then, I mailed copies not only to the HOA but to every homeowner in the neighborhood. Transparency was my weapon. Within a week, the entire community was buzzing. Some residents began questioning the OA's priorities. Why were they wasting funds fighting art when actual maintenance issues were being ignored? The sidewalks were cracked, the playground lights were out, and yet the board was obsessed with a wall that made people smile. Patricia doubled down. She started issuing petty violations left and right. Trash cans left out a minute too long, holiday lights hung a day too early, lawn height exceeding regulation by an inch. It was chaos, and the more she pushed, the more people started to push back. It became a quiet suburban war, fought not with noise but with paperwork. Neighbors began sharing stories, uniting against the pettiness. Some even began decorating their mailboxes, adding small flower decals or flags, minor acts of rebellion inspired by my mural. Patricia tried fining them too, but suddenly there were too many to target at once. The HOA meetings turned into battlegrounds. The once orderly gatherings of not in compliance became sessions filled with murmurs, side eyes, and frustrated questions. I sat quietly in the back row during one of them, watching Patricia's carefully composed calm begin to crack. Her voice grew sharper as she defended every fine, every notice, every rule. But the crowd was shifting. The balance of power was moving. Then came the moment that changed everything. A local journalist, tipped off by a resident, showed up to cover the HO art controversy. They took photos of the mural, interviewed a few neighbors, and even quoted the HOA's excessive language. The article went viral overnight. Suddenly, my quiet suburban conflict became a local sensation. HOA versus Homeowner. The battle over art. The headline read. The mural was featured on social media, drawing hundreds of supportive comments from strangers who loved the idea of standing up to HOA tyranny. Patricia was furious. She called an emergency board meeting and attempted to pass a new bylaw banning non-approved decorative displays on visible surfaces. But to do that, she needed a majority vote, and she didn't have it. The board members, under community pressure, began distancing themselves from her. Still, she wasn't done. A few days later, I found a new notice. This time not from the OA, but from the City Code Enforcement Office. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint claiming my mural violated visual pollution standards. It was obvious who that someone was. Patricia had escalated the war. I met with the city inspector, ready for whatever came next. He arrived with a clipboard, took a single look at the mural, and actually smiled. He told me it was one of the most beautiful things he'd seen on a suburban block, and that the city had no issues with it whatsoever. He even took a photo for his own records. When Patricia learned that her complaint had backfired, her fury became quiet, controlled, the kind of silence that meant she was planning something bigger. And I was right. The next week, strange things started happening. My trash wasn't being collected. Anonymous letters appeared in my mailbox, calling the mural tacky and attention-seeking. Small scratches appeared on the base of the paint near the driveway. Subtle vandalism. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Patricia had stopped fighting me with fines. She was now trying to make me miserable enough to quit. But she didn't realize one thing. I wasn't backing down. I was done being silent. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. But not in the way she expected, because the mural wasn't just staying. It was about to grow. The mural had become a symbol. What started as a small act of defiance against petty HOA rules was now a quiet revolution spreading through the neighborhood. People began adding their own touches. A painted flower here, a small garden gnome there. The dull uniformity that Patricia had enforced for years was beginning to crack, and that terrified her. But while she doubled down on her campaign to break me, I had already moved on to my next plan. If she wanted to fight my creativity, I was going to make that fight impossible to contain. The mural wasn't going to stay on my garage. It was going to grow, across my driveway, along my fence, maybe even onto the sidewalk. Not in a messy or rebellious way, but in a way that told a story. I reached out to the same local artist who had painted the first mural. He was thrilled when I told him what I wanted to do. We met quietly, late at night, to plan the expansion. A full Garden of Freedom theme that would turn the front of my property into a living, breathing artwork. We mapped out where each section would go, how the colors would flow, and how it would all stay perfectly within legal limits. Because this time, I wasn't just painting for beauty. I was painting for strategy. By keeping everything within city regulations, I made sure the HOA couldn't touch it. Every inch was technically compliant setbacks, reflective coating limits, non-commercial design, and appropriate sealant. I even got written approval from the city's Cultural Arts Committee, labeling it as a publicly visible private art installation. So when Patricia tried to claim it was graffiti or vandalism, she'd be fighting against her own city. The day the expansion started, the neighborhood gathered again. Kids watched as new scenes took shape. A sunrise over wildflowers, birds in flight, children laughing in color. My once simple house became a landmark of art and defiance, and Patricia was losing control. She began pacing the neighborhood like a watchdog, snapping photos and jotting notes in her little binder. She stood at the edge of my property, pretending to inspect the sidewalk, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. But she couldn't do anything, not legally. Every time she tried, I was ready with documentation, city letters, and witnesses. That was when she changed tactics again. The HOA started sending out mass newsletters framed as reminders to all homeowners. They included new guidelines about exterior aesthetics, warning against unapproved alterations that disrupt the community's harmony. They didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew. Yet, instead of isolating me, it made more people side with me. Neighbors who had stayed silent before began to openly express their frustration. The HOA wasn't improving the community. It was policing it, and people were tired of being policed. Within weeks, a petition started circulating to review the HOA board's leadership. It spread faster than Patricia could suppress it. The mural had become the spark for something bigger, a challenge to the years of quiet control and fear. Meanwhile, I kept expanding the mural one brushstroke at a time. Each edition told a story. A small corner represented community, another resilience, and near the center of the design, I painted a single, towering tree, its roots intertwined with bright ribbons of color. The roots symbolized the people of the neighborhood, connected beneath the surface even when divided on top. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Patricia had fined me over grass, paint, and chalk, but now the art she hated was uniting the very people she ruled over. Then came the breaking point. During one of the monthly HOA meetings, a motion was presented, not by Patricia but by another board member. The motion called for a vote of no confidence in the current president, citing her misuse of authority, unfair targeting of residents, and personal bias. Patricia froze. It was the first time anyone had publicly challenged her rule. The room was divided. Some still feared her, others finally had the courage to stand up. Voices rose, papers rustled, and for the first time, the HOA's facade of order collapsed into chaos. And in the middle of it all, someone stood and mentioned the mural, not as a violation, but as a reminder. They said it represented what the community could be when fear didn't rule it. The room fell silent. Patricia left the meeting early. The next morning, a storm rolled in. Not a metaphorical one, a literal one. Strong winds, pounding rain, thunder shaking the street. By the next day, the mural was streaked with water and debris. But when the sun came out again, something incredible happened. The colors didn't fade. They shimmered. The sealant and varnish made it glisten under sunlight, like the storm had washed away the hate and left only strength. Neighbors gathered again, smiling, taking pictures. Even the local news station covered it, calling it the storm-proof mural that stood against HOA pressure. Patricia watched from her window, curtains half drawn, her empire crumbling one brushstroke at a time. But even with her losing grip, she wasn't done. 2 days later, an unmarked truck arrived in the neighborhood. Late at night. Inside were men in uniforms, not police, not city workers, but contractors. They carried paint rollers, scraping tools, and ladders. Patricia had called them. She was going to erase the mural herself. What she didn't know was that I had cameras installed. High-resolution, motion-triggered night vision cameras, all around the property. And by the time those men started rolling white paint over the wall, the footage was already uploading to the cloud. By the time the morning sun rose, the damage was done. The mural, the pride of the entire neighborhood, had been defaced. A thick layer of dull, beige paint coated most of the wall, dripping unevenly across what used to be vibrant blues, greens, and golds. It looked like someone had tried to erase joy itself. The neighborhood woke to the shock. Cars slowed as they passed my house. People whispered. Some even came to my door, furious on my behalf. But I stayed calm, because I already knew everything that had happened, and more importantly, I had proof. Every angle, every moment, every can of paint being opened, all caught on camera. The footage clearly showed the hired contractors, the truck they came in, and Patricia standing at a distance, directing them under the cover of night. She had crossed from petty harassment into criminal territory. I didn't go to the HOA that morning. I went straight to the police. The moment I showed the officer the footage, his expression changed. This wasn't just vandalism. It was destruction of private property, coordinated and deliberate. The fact that the HOA president had hired people to do it made it worse. A report was filed. By noon, word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Patricia's front yard, once perfectly manicured, had become a gathering point for gossip and quiet anger. People were tired of her control, but this was different. This was too far. The police visited her house that afternoon. The sight of the squad car parked in her driveway sent a shockwave through the community. Curtains moved, doors cracked open, phones recorded from across the street. Patricia stood at her door, red-faced, trying to argue. But there was no escaping the evidence. She wasn't arrested that day, but she was issued a notice of investigation and ordered to cease any HOA-related activity until further review. That alone was enough to strip her of her power, temporarily at least. For the first time, the HOA board had to operate without her iron grip. Meetings that used to be cold and controlled turned chaotic but honest. Residents spoke freely. Some were angry, some frightened, but all of them were aware that a change was coming. Meanwhile, I got to work again. The mural would not stay buried under beige. I contacted the same artist, and when I showed him what happened, he didn't hesitate. Together, we decided that instead of restoring the old mural, we would paint something new, something bigger, bolder, and impossible to destroy. We stripped away the beige layer carefully, treating the wall as if it were sacred. And then we began again. This time, the design was different. It depicted a phoenix rising from a cloud of gray, its wings stretching wide, scattering dust and paint chips like ashes. Beneath it, faint silhouettes of people stood together, looking upward. It was no longer just a mural about freedom. It was a mural about rebirth. The neighborhood rallied around it. People brought snacks for the painters. Kids helped wash brushes. Even the local hardware store donated paint supplies when they heard the story. The entire process became an event, a symbol of defiance and unity against tyranny. And just like before, I made sure everything was done by the book. Every permit, every approval, every signature was in place. Patricia would find no loopholes this time. When the mural was finished, the news came back again. The same crew that had covered the first story now returned, filming the rebirth of the wall. The footage of Patricia's vandalism aired alongside it, painting her in a light she couldn't hide from. She became the villain of her own making. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. This time, it wasn't about enforcing rules. It was about accountability. Residents showed up in record numbers, demanding answers, demanding change. Patricia attended, but she was a shadow of her former self. The confidence, the smug superiority, all gone. Her voice trembled as she tried to defend her actions, claiming she only wanted to restore neighborhood order. But the crowd didn't buy it. They had seen the video. They had seen the police report. They had seen the mural return stronger than before. When the vote came to officially remove her as president, the result was unanimous. Patricia was done. She stood there in disbelief, holding the very binder she once used to terrorize people with petty fines and threats. Now, it meant nothing. After she left, silence filled the room for a long moment. Then, someone suggested something unexpected, that I should take her place. At first, I resisted. I hadn't started any of this to gain power. I just wanted peace, creativity, and fairness. But as people began clapping, cheering, and insisting that the neighborhood needed someone reasonable, I realized something important. Change only sticks when someone protects it, so I accepted. When I took the seat at the front of the HOA board, I didn't feel pride or vengeance. I felt responsibility. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building something better. Over the following weeks, we rewrote many of the HOA's outdated rules. We eliminated unnecessary fines, added resident voting on major decisions, and encouraged community projects instead of restrictions. For the first time, people felt heard. Even Patricia, in her isolation, couldn't stop the transformation. But she wasn't done with her grudge. Not yet. One morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a printed notice from a law firm representing a concerned HOA member. It accused me of violating zoning laws, claiming my mural distracted drivers and reduced property values. It was clearly Patricia's doing. But what she didn't realize was that her complaint triggered something she didn't expect: a city review. And when inspectors came to evaluate the situation, they didn't see a nuisance, they saw art. They saw a neighborhood that had come alive. And soon that mural, once despised, vandalized, and fought over, was officially recognized by the city's Cultural Preservation Office as a community landmark. Patricia's letter had backfired completely. The woman who tried to erase my wall had made it permanent instead. And while she fumed in silence, the mural glowed brighter than ever, its phoenix wings catching the light of every sunrise. The mural had become more than a piece of art. It had become a movement. What started as a neighborhood dispute over a simple wall had evolved into something far greater than anyone, including me, could have imagined. Each morning, as the sun rose and painted the phoenix in gold, I would see families walking by, children pointing at it with wide eyes, and strangers stopping to take photos. Soon, local blogs began writing about it. Then came the reporters again. But this time, it wasn't for drama, it was for celebration. They called it the Phoenix Wall, a symbol of resilience in the face of HOA tyranny. Articles described how a small community turned oppression into art, and how one homeowner refused to let control and pettiness dim the color from his world. The story spread fast. Other neighborhoods started reaching out, sharing their own frustrations with their HOAs. Some asked for advice, others wanted to start their own community projects. It was surreal. People were drawing inspiration from something that began as one person simply standing up for his right to decorate his property. Meanwhile, within our own neighborhood, things felt different. Gone were the tense stares and silent judging looks that used to dominate our community meetings. People now spoke openly, laughed freely, and shared ideas without fear. The rigid order that Patricia had built was gone, replaced by something living and human. As the new HOA president, I had one goal: to make sure no one ever had to go through what I did. I began hosting community days every few months. Instead of meetings filled with rules and citations, we hosted picnics, games, and workshops. Families painted flower pots, teens helped elderly neighbors with yard work, and we even built a small lending library next to the park. The neighborhood was thriving, but not everyone was happy about it. Patricia, though stripped of her power, still lived a few houses away. She avoided most of us, her once bustling front porch now barren and quiet. But every so often, I'd see her standing at her window, arms crossed, glaring at the mural that had become our pride. Her bitterness had aged her faster than time ever could. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from the city's cultural department. They wanted to formally recognize the Phoenix Wall as an official community landmark. It would be added to the city's registry of public art, a permanent fixture protected by local ordinance. When I told the neighborhood, the reaction was explosive. There were cheers, tears, and an overwhelming sense of validation. What had started as defiance was now a piece of history. But with the recognition came attention. Lots of it. Reporters returned, cameras rolled, and people from outside the community started visiting. Cars lined up on weekends, families took photos in front of the wall, and even school art teachers brought students to learn about its message. The wall had become a beacon. And ironically, that's exactly what triggered Patricia's final outburst. The more people celebrated the mural, the angrier she became. She started filing noise complaints about visitor traffic. She wrote letters to the city claiming the wall caused visual pollution. She even put up a sign on her lawn that read, "STHOUS." It was desperate and sad, but it didn't work. Her complaints were dismissed one by one. The city inspectors, having visited themselves, only confirmed that the mural was not only legal but cherished. Then came the day of the unveiling ceremony, the official dedication of the Phoenix Wall as a recognized landmark. The mayor himself was attending, along with local artists and reporters. It was going to be a huge event. The neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Kids practiced songs, volunteers set up chairs, and local vendors offered free snacks and drinks. Banners fluttered in the breeze, proudly displaying, "The Phoenix rises." But there was one person whose absence was deafening: Patricia. While everyone celebrated, her blinds stayed tightly shut. For once, the woman who always needed to control everything had no say at all. The power she had once wielded over everyone had completely evaporated. When the mayor gave his speech, he spoke about unity, resilience, and the importance of art in shaping community identity. He called me to the front, handing me a small plaque that officially named the Phoenix Wall a protected cultural asset. The applause that followed was thunderous. It echoed down the street, bouncing off houses that once felt cold and closed off. I looked around and saw pride on every face. At that moment, I realized something deeper. This mural wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced by rules, bullied by power, or told that creativity didn't belong in their world. And yet, in the distance, I noticed movement in Patricia's window. The blinds parted slightly, revealing her face, tight-lipped, hollow-eyed, and defeated. For a brief moment, I wondered if she felt any regret, if she saw what could have been had she chosen kindness over control. But as quickly as she appeared, the blinds closed again. The ceremony ended with cheers, laughter, and music. As people began to leave, a group of local artists approached me with an idea. They wanted to expand the mural, add a second section on the opposite wall, turning the entire area into a community art space. The idea filled me with renewed energy. If Patricia wanted to erase color from this neighborhood, then I would drown her bitterness in a sea of creativity. And so planning began for the next phase. The artists met weekly, brainstorming new designs. Residents volunteered to help. We even set up donation boxes to fund the project. Within a month, we had raised enough money to start. Construction began quietly, but the buzz spread fast. Soon, our small street had become a landmark of its own, a living example of what could happen when people stood together against control. And Patricia, she could only watch as her carefully sculpted, beige-colored world faded into irrelevance. But something told me she wasn't finished yet. People like her never let go without one last desperate attempt to reclaim control. And that attempt was coming sooner than anyone expected. The mural had transformed the neighborhood into something alive and breathing. What was once a cluster of uniform houses ruled by fear and fines had become a community of creativity and cooperation. Kids laughed in the park again. The sound of music drifted through open windows, and the rigid silence that once defined our HOA was gone forever. But just when it seemed that peace had finally settled in, Patricia struck one last time. It started quietly, a whisper among a few residents, a few unexpected letters in mailboxes. She had found a loophole. Or so she thought. The HOA's old charter, the one written years before I had even moved in, contained a clause stating that any permanent structure or alteration visible from the street could be challenged by a petition of majority homeowner disapproval. Patricia had discovered it buried deep within outdated paperwork. She started gathering signatures, knocking on doors, spinning her version of the truth, claiming the mural had brought unwanted traffic, noise, and reputation damage to the neighborhood. Some believed her, others pitied her, but she was determined. When I first heard about the petition, I wasn't worried. Most people supported the mural and the community we had built around it. But Patricia was clever. She didn't need everyone. She just needed enough confusion to cause a stir. Within a week, she managed to collect several signatures, mostly from new residents who didn't fully understand the story behind the wall. Then she submitted her petition to the HOA board, demanding a vote to restore neighborhood standards. It was her last play for control. The tension returned like a ghost, old arguments resurfaced, and neighbors began whispering again. Some feared that the city's recognition of the mural might not protect it if the HOA voted against it. Patricia spread rumors that the city's decision could be reversed if enough complaints were filed. It was manipulation at its finest. The same tactics she had used before, fueled by resentment and pride. But this time, things were different. We weren't scared of her anymore. The day of the vote arrived. It was a bright Saturday morning, and the community hall was packed. Reporters stood outside, sensing that this was the end of a long saga. The mural supporters filled most of the seats, wearing shirts with small phoenix emblems. Patricia stood in the corner, clutching her petition, her lips pressed tightly together. I took a deep breath and stepped to the front. Instead of anger or argument, I spoke about what the mural had done, how it brought people together, how it turned strangers into friends, and how it transformed a place once defined by fear into something alive. I reminded everyone that the mural was not an act of defiance, but an act of hope. Then, I showed them the letter from the city's cultural department. It clearly stated that the Phoenix Wall was a registered landmark and could not be altered or destroyed without city approval. Even if the HOA wanted to remove it, they legally couldn't. The room fell silent. Patricia's face turned pale. She tried to interrupt, claiming the city had no authority over HOA rules. But the crowd no longer listened. They were tired of the fighting, the pettiness, the endless control. When the vote was called, the results were overwhelming. Nearly every hand went up in favor of keeping the mural. Only Patricia and one other resident voted against it. It was done. The mural was safe. The community erupted in applause, and for the first time, Patricia had nothing left to say. She gathered her papers, trembling, and left the hall without another word. Some said she moved out a few weeks later. Others claimed she still lived there but rarely came outside. Either way, her reign was over. In the weeks that followed, peace returned. The mural became busier than ever, attracting art students, families, and even travelers who had read about it online. We finished the second phase, a sweeping landscape of color featuring not just the Phoenix, but children, trees, and flowing rivers. Every resident had contributed a brushstroke somewhere on the wall. It wasn't just my mural anymore. It was ours. Months passed, and the seasons changed. The wall weathered sun, wind, and rain, yet the colors never faded. Each time I passed by, I felt the same sense of pride and warmth I did the day it was completed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the mural in a golden glow, I stood back and reflected on everything that had happened. What began as a simple act of defending a child's chalk drawings had become a battle for freedom, creativity, and community. The HOA fines, the threats, the humiliation, all of it had led to this moment. The Phoenix wasn't just paint. It was a story of rebirth, of standing up to those who tried to control beauty, and of refusing to let fear dictate how one lived. I realized that art, when born out of defiance and hope, becomes something unbreakable. No rule book, no committee, no person could erase what we had created together. The following spring, the city invited me to speak at an art festival. They wanted me to share the story behind the Phoenix Wall, how it began, how it survived, and what it symbolized. I stood on that stage looking out at hundreds of faces and told them everything. Not to boast, but to remind them that sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be silenced to change everything around them. When I returned home that night, the street was quiet. The mural glowed faintly under the soft streetlights, its colors alive even in the darkness. I could hear the faint laughter of children from the park and the rustle of trees swaying gently in the breeze. And for the first time in years, I felt that the neighborhood truly belonged to its people again. The HOA was still there, of course, but different now. It served the community instead of ruling it. Fines were rare, creativity was celebrated, and Patricia's name became nothing more than a distant memory. As I stood before the wall one last time, a warm wind swept past, carrying the scent of spring and paint and something indescribable, something free. The Phoenix, wings spread wide, seemed to shimmer under the lamplight as if alive. And in that moment, I knew the message it carried had taken root not just in paint and plaster, but in every person who had ever dared to create something beautiful, even when told not to. The wall would stand for years to come, a testament to color over control, community over fear, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to be silenced. The end.